Commissioner for Adult Social Care, so hopefully I mix a range of things together. Formerly I'm a social worker, I suppose, but I'm more qualified as a psychotherapist. I've spent 20 years as a Samaritan volunteer, 30 years in adult social care, and about 15 as a therapist. A bit like Sade, I come at it from a starting point of, I suppose, being suicidal when I was 18 and wondering what that was like and not really understanding what those feelings were. But interestingly for me, I suppose surprisingly, the person that most really pulled me back from that was my father. And I say surprisingly because he was a person I wouldn't have assumed to be very present in my life. But it influenced me as an individual, in that I had my family and some close friends. And it wasn't about 3 years later, I joined and became a Samaritan at 21, and I was the youngest Samaritan in my branch in South East London. What interests me about this subject is suicide and depression. We don't like to talk about, we'll find a whole range of language and words to camouflage. And they cross with other taboos. Other taboos such as drug use, alcohol use, the way we are sexually, how we identify, how we want to be perceived by our families and our friends, and how we want to be successful and meet the expectations and pressures that we feel. Some of those pressures come from within, some of those come from our families and what I might argue our systems. We use a terrible phrase called systems. I try not to use very much jargon because I'm not very good with jargon. And, but underneath all those feelings, people will give you hints. They'll use language which is comfortable for them, language which may camouflage a feeling. And I suppose as a therapist, my art sometimes, and my friends will joke that I'm very noisy and very chatty. So actually they do wonder when I'm doing therapy how I sit quietly and listen. But I can assure you I do try. As a therapist, I work with what's called humanistic theory, transactional analysis, person-centred, do some cognitive behavioural approaches. Oddly enough, my master's degree is in psychosexual therapy and issues around sexual and relationship issues. But all those approaches get muddled into one way of being with somebody. What I try to do is I try to start with the person. I start with what brings them to see me. Because actually I'm very lucky certainly as a therapist I'm very lucky. Certainly when I was a mental health social worker, you were in the middle of working with someone who was very unwell. As a therapist, people have made that first step, which is a really important first step, and actually is their start of their road to some recovery because they make that step themselves. But I start with the person. I assess somebody and I agree a contract, and I mostly would never call it a contract with the clients that I see, but I have a contract which will say, if you feel really down, you text me. I will respond to you and we will agree a time to have a conversation. At times when people are being very vulnerable and feeling very suicidal, I may see them more frequently, I may have phone contact with them in between visits. I'll work with them to see what works best for them and what works within their life, really. One client once said to me, "You are my best kept secret." And so using technology these days is great because it means I can have contact with people without interfering in their day-to-day life and without that going outside into them having to tell other people. But what I try to do in the therapy room, and what I try to do when I'm seeing people, is to help people have a language and a confidence to say some of the things that they feel and think. And so it's very important for me, whilst I would mostly say most of my clients wouldn't say I feel suicidal, it's important for me to say back to them, it seems to me like you're saying you're feeling suicidal. What do you mean by that? What are your thoughts? How does that feel? What have you been thinking about? Because it's about trying to help them move away from that sense of isolation with those feelings. I work with people's systems or their lives, and we all have a system. You know, I have a system which is born and brought up in London. I have a range of sort of familiarities, and there are things about my life which make me vulnerable because of some of my history, our underlying issues about where we come from and about what makes us vulnerable. You'll always, I'm sure if you think about children, you'll see that some children are slightly more robust than others, some are slightly more vulnerable than others, some are slightly more sensitive. We develop as children, my child development days are long behind me, but we mostly formed quite a lot of our initial beings as a person by the time we're 4 or 5. So actually, those underlying issues are there already. Maintaining issues. What maintains our depression? What maintains our suicidal feelings? And they can be a range of things. It can be our lifestyle, it can be the continual alcohol use, it can be being in an unhappy relationship, it can be being in a conflicted environment. Any of those things. I also look for triggers. Sade talked about alcohol. If someone's drinking a lot and using illicit drugs, most people do addictive behaviours, normally do 2. Rarely do they do 1 addictive behaviour. So if you're using drugs, and more these days with younger men, you're finding a range of sexually addictive behaviours in there, and there's a need to talk about that, because that isn't what they want, it isn't what drives them, but it is sometimes the only outlet that they feel gives them some of the comfort and escapism from their feelings. So I also look obviously at what supports the person, because if we don't look at what supports the person, we can't try to help them find ways of building themselves up. What I would say about all of this is, as someone who's spoken to quite a number of people who have been suicidal, and certainly as a Samaritan volunteer speaking to people who were actually attempting it at that moment in time, I'd say I'm not an expert. The expert is the person with their feelings. I would mostly say I'm not that skilled. What I attempt to do is to develop a relationship of trust and to develop a relationship of openness so someone feels safe. Which does mean that some people turn up to see me on the rare occasions and doesn't really like the look of me, which is absolutely fine. Because actually, the relationship, if you're going to see somebody as a counsellor or therapist, you have to feel really comfortable with them, because you're going to tell them some really personal things. And certainly as someone who's gone through therapy, I was quite fussy about who I saw, because I didn't want the things I was going to say to be said to someone I didn't feel comfortable and felt some warmth to. And it's really important. So I would structure it in this way. This is how I work. I'd mostly say, if anybody knows me in Brent, you'll never spot that, because I'm much more sort of fluid, but that's how I write it up in my head. And from that, I will come out with a hierarchy of needs. So I'll start with what really needs to be addressed first with you. It's really great to come and see